close till I get up. Time is barely on our side. I don't wanna waste what's left. The storms we chase are leading us, and love is all we'll ever trust. Yeah, no, I don't wanna waste what's left. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, till my shadow turns to sun rays. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, and on we'll through the highways, till my shadow turns to sun rays. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, and on we'll go. Turn us to thousands, and we'll grow in number, fueled by them to see the horizon. Turn us to thousands, and on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, till my shadow turns to sun rays. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, and on we'll go.
Hey everyone, welcome to the stream. If this is your first time, I realize that my intros are pretty rough when it comes to the stream. So if this is your first time, welcome. My name's Dan. I'm on this journey towards the DevNet Expert certification. It's a new Cisco certification, specifically the lab part, the 8-hour practical lab exam. So we'll kind of just get started with, where we're at, what we've covered, and kind of where we're going. So I always start out with this Google Sheet, and I think I want to zoom in a little bit here. This kind of is my, there we go. So this is kind of like my compass, and it kind of points in where I'm going. And so you can see here, everything in green obviously is topics and things that we've covered. And this week we're taking a look at Ansible. And for those that follow me on Twitter, it was kind of interesting. We had an interesting dialogue on there. Really all this week. I put out there that, this week has been kind of a crazy ride with the DSL of Ansible. And what a DSL is, a domain-specific language. Some may like it to be called that, some may not. But basically what that does is it basically creates an abstraction for you and for the end user to use the tool. So it is helpful. It just turns more complex as you introduce more complexity into your automation. And we'll kind of take a look at that tonight a little bit. But yeah, so it's an interesting tool. And I will say, kind of before we get into it, if you're new to automation, or I always encourage people to ask just general automation questions in this stream. I got started with Ansible, and so it's not like it's a very easy, low barrier to entry tool, and it allows you to knock out kind of that low hanging fruit, but as you learn more about network automation and more things that you can do using, the native programming language, whether it be like Python or Go, that allows you to do some more specific checks. It allows you to add some more logic into your coding, and ultimately, it's just easier to manipulate data or get it to what you're looking for versus kind of fighting that structure. But like I said, Ansible provides a really good structure for those kind of just starting out. And I know I'm probably going to get some heat for saying that, because some are just like, no way it belongs in network automation at all. It's really good in kind of the server space, from my understanding, for the sysadmins out there. But for me, I think there's definitely still a place. And like I said, it can knock out some of that kind of low hanging fruit and those quick wins for you when it comes to automation. And ultimately, it is a framework. It's a platform. So it provides that structure. And I know, especially for me, like, it helps whenever you kind of walk into something and there's some guardrails up, right? You're not kind of just walking into something and you're like, you're given options A through Z and you have no idea where to start. Ansible kind of helps you with that. Another kind of relative example, and I'm not relating it at all, but I always think of I think of web frameworks as well, right? Like there's a web framework like Flask, that's pretty much, there's structure around it, but it's a very plugin focused framework, or library, I should say. And then there's something like Django, that's more opinionated, and it has a lot of things pre-built right into it. I don't want you to think that I'm comparing, Ansible to other to web frameworks in any way, but I'm trying to get the concept of there are some Python libraries and frameworks that they're opinionated, which is nice whenever you're first starting out. So, hey Nick, hey Matt, how are you guys? Matt says, I'm keen to learn some Ansible. I find it hard to work with, but I also haven't read the docs. Yeah, it's it's kind of hard to work with when you're not, if it's your very first thing with network automation, because it introduces a lot to you. It introduces YAML. It introduces the opinionated structure of YAML, right, with indentation. It has a lot of things like filters, directory structures. I actually find that to be, I don't see that brought up too much, but specifically for me, the way that the directories have to be structured for certain inheritance. So specifically around group variables and host variables. And I'll show you that, during the stream as well. Some of that, like, you have to read the documentation to get to that point. And it makes sense once you understand it, but when you first are starting out, you're hit with like all these different ways to do something. And so we'll kind of start fresh with a playbook and then move into kind of host vars, group vars, and roles. And then, kind of go from there. So Matt says, I feel there are some things in it that are hard to find out when compared to Python. Like around gathering data, manipulating it, and then using it again. Yeah, there are ways to do that, and Ansible does have a kind of a flexible way you could build modules and filters. Filters is kind of the way of manipulating that data. But ultimately, I think I even put in a tweet, like, there's a lot of things in Ansible that you could do in about 5 to 10 lines of code. You could build a little Python function and accommodate the same thing, and it provides you the flexibility to have complete control over your data. But anyways, right, it's required for the DevNet, not even just the DevNet expert, really, just DevNet certifications overall. And ultimately, it's going to be around, right? So you got to at least have it in your toolbox, whether you want to use it or not. You know, there's people that may never want to use it, right? Throw it out. But yeah, so I just wanted to provide a little bit of background. And like I said, I mean, for those in the chat, most of you guys follow me on Twitter, and I'm sure you've seen the back and forths and the threads that are that I've been added to or have been a part of this week with Ansible. So regardless, it's fun. It's fun. Okay, so specifically around Ansible is it falls under this one here, section 2.0, which is 30% of the exam. So this is kind of like the bigger part here. When I first read over this, I didn't think really nothing too much of it, to be honest. Creating using a role, utilizing Ansible. So there's a concept of a role in Ansible, and we'll take a look at that. Given support documentation. So to me, right, I've started with Ansible. I have a lot of experience with Ansible. I'm definitely no guru, right? I haven't created custom filters or modules or anything like that, right? I'm more or less a consumer. And so, but I'm very familiar with the concepts that they're, asking you to do here. Loops, conditionals, variables, and templating. Templating specifically, Jinja 2 basically. And then using different connection plugins, CLI or network CLI, HTTP API, which basically is, your REST calls, RESTconf, NX API, and then netconf. So I'm pretty comfortable with this. So realistically, like, I've just been really reading through the Ansible documentation this week, really trying to take some time to do that, and labbing it up. Most of the time I try to take the way like I normally study is I'll find a written resource, I'll read through it, I'll take notes, might watch a video after that and then take additional notes, and then I lab it up. But since this is more, it is a practical exam, I've been doing more labbing than anything, right? I haven't really been touching a book, specifically around Ansible. So that's kind of where I've been at, just mostly labbing. And for those interested, I created a separate project, and I realized that whenever I was prepping for the stream, just kind of reviewing the code, I realized that a lot of my code's kind of just spread out. I have some in GitLab, some in GitHub. I literally just created a new project in GitLab for just this Ansible piece, because my hopes were to create a CI/CD pipeline, right, that would kind of feed off of this. So that's why I wanted to create a separate repository completely. So, for those that are following along and hoping that, to take a look at some of my resources, after, when you start your journey for the DevNet expert or DevNet professional, I promise I'll get all this sorted out. I'll get the right examples in the right places, create repositories where needed. But, right now I'm just kind of winging it per se. So this is a brand new repository. I'll put the link in the chat. I'll also include it. I always send a tweet out after stream, so I'll include it in that as well. Let me see. Oops. There we go. Okay. So the link to this repository is in the chat, and it's kind of what we'll be going off of. And so without further ado, let's just jump into the code here. As always, I'm going to be using the actual DevNet expert, the candidate workstation VM. And so obviously I'll be using it on the exam the day of. So I've been trying to do most of my work in this VM. And so let me see. Matt asked, do you do much automation at work? Yes. Right now, yeah, it's practically all I do is automation work, and I'm in Python most of the day. I'm in like a hybrid role, so I still like in meetings and stuff talk about network and networking, but most of the time my day is coding or trying to basically run like an automation tool. So yeah, I would say most of my work is in the automation space. It's not exactly tied to like ACI or any of those kind of more like platforms. I'm kind of just in your raw Python and doing kind of custom automation from that. Okay, so let me explain kind of what we'll be doing. So I've been using this model-driven telemetry lab that we built back when we did the TIG stack months ago now. Yeah, probably at least a month. So we have a CSR router, and we have a Nexus 9K V switch. And so I've already built out the inventory file for that. So in Ansible, there's kind of two ways to define inventory through Ansible. Obviously, there's some inventory plugins, right? So if you have a separate like source of truth or CMDB, there's ways to integrate it with Ansible. But to actually create an Ansible file or inventory file, you can use YAML or an INI format. INI format's actually a little easier to read in my opinion. So that's why I also chose the YAML, is because it was more difficult for me. Well, basically, we have two groups. We have an IOS-XE group and an NX-OS group. Within those groups, we have one host created with an alias. So my CSR, I'm just calling CSR1. That's the IP address. And then we have the N9K1 with the IP address. So just so you're aware, right, everything falls under the all group. And then under the all group, we have two groups called IOS-XE and NX-OS, and then the respective hosts are in there. And so we have the inventory file. We have our Ansible config. So by default, you normally, when you pip install Ansible, you'll get the default location for the Ansible config file will be in the /etc directory, so /etc/Ansible config, right? And so you can override that by including an Ansible config file within your repository, and that's what I did here. Basically, I included where the inventory is, so that way I don't have to indicate the inventory every time I run a playbook. I did 15 forks, which basically allow kind of the forking the process, so it allows what am I trying to say? Concurrency, to do concurrent tasks, and so then there's host key checking, which I put as false because I don't have all these SSH keys defined somewhere, and then the vault password file. So this actually is interesting because the vault Ansible Vault is a utility that allows you to encrypt your file, or I'm sorry, a file or a string, and then reuse it within the playbook. And the nice part is that you're not storing your plain text credentials, right, or any sensitive information. You can use a vault password and encrypt your credentials. Nick asks, "Hey Dan, did you see how InfluxDB quote tweeted your telemetry stream this week?" No, I did not. That's cool. Thanks for letting me know. I'll have to check it out after the stream. I did not know they quote tweeted. That's weird. You would think I'd get a notification about that. Huh. Oh well. Oh well. So, cool. I'll have to check it out. Matt asks, can you show us how you use Vault for credentials? Yeah, I can. Let me think of the easiest way to show you this. Oh, let me think of where I even store my credentials. Oh, so there's my Vault Pass, which is Dan's Lab 7. Nothing secret about that. I just made it up on the fly. But basically, that's your plain text. That's your plain text password. And so instead of, because the idea is, and I'll kind of walk through the process, you create a, you either encrypt, you can use the Ansible Vault CLI. I think it's Ansible dash Vault. I'm sorry. Oh, not even in the right category yet. Deactivate source VNVs Ansible bin activate. I thought it was a dash. I don't. Let's see. Yeah, it is. Okay. So, here you can do Ansible Vault, and then you could either encrypt a file or encrypt a string. So I could put just my password. Matt says without showing us your creds. Yeah, so this is not my actual credential to log into the device. The Vault Pass is the password to decrypt my credentials. So technically, yes, you have the keys to the kingdom, but like I said, it's not anything secretive, right? I'm putting all this on a public repository anyways. So the way that I did it was I encrypted a file called Vault, and you can't see my password here, but I encrypted this file, which has, if you go to my vars file, you'll see vault_Ansible user and vault_Ansible password. These are keys in here. These are keys, and then the value of that is used as my Ansible user and Ansible password, right? But this is all encrypted. And the way it's encrypted and decrypted is using my Vault Pass, which, like I said, I showed you. If it was a big deal, I wouldn't show you. And so, let's see. So you can see the options here, right? I encrypted a whole file. So I literally said Ansible-Vault, encrypt, and then pointed it to this .vault_pass. This is not, by the way, this is on my gitignore file. So it's not getting put into version tracking. Like I said, not a huge deal. You can definitely see it on stream, but I'm not storing it out in GitLab, right? So, so now if I wanted to decrypt, because obviously the file I want to decrypt is this Vault file. And so if I go to group vars all, there's a Vault file right there, right? So I can do Ansible Vault. And if I wanted to decrypt it, I would use the decrypt verb. Decrypt. And then we'll see what options we have here. So we decrypt and then put the file name. And then after you put the file name, you'll see that you can specify to say ask for Vault Pass. So I could type in that password that I just showed you. And that would decrypt it. Or you could say, is there a Vault password file? And that file obviously is what I'm using. So the whole thing, and I'm obviously not going to do this. Not like there's much secrets here anymore. But if you do, let me think. Actually, I will do it just to show you. So if we do vault, so it looks confusing, but vault is the name of the file. So Ansible vault, decrypt vault, and then we say vault password file. I think I can do a relative path. I think. And relative path would put us out 1, out 2, and then dot vault pass. All right, let's see if that works. I don't know if I can do relative path. Oh, there you go. So it wasn't, like I said, nothing big. I actually think I created those because that netconf2 username password we created back in when we did telemetry. So not that big of a secret. But and let's say we wanted to encrypt it, right? If we want to encrypt it again, we can do encrypt. And then you can do, yeah, like I said, ask for the password, or you can then, oops. I'll just up arrow actually. Right, so instead of doing decrypt, we'll do encrypt. We'll say we want to encrypt the vault file, and then we we'll say the vault password, and watch, we'll do an encrypt again, and there you go. Matt says, thank you. So when you go to write a playbook to use those details, I guess you're asking, how do I use them when I go to create a playbook? So the nice part is, let me just decrypt them again. Right, so we have the username here, vault Ansible user, and then vault Ansible password. If you look in, I actually have a separate vars file, and I completely just glided over this, but I'll get to it. This is using kind of that Jinja 2 markup. So, you know, the double braces mean variable, and then the quotations is kind of like the string, right? The literal value. No, you're good. Don't worry about it. So, you know, I'm trying to use the vault Ansible user and vault Ansible password. And the way to get that is using, right, these are the keys here, and we just call on them in our vars file. And so now Ansible knows how to get these from our vault file. And it uses them from the vault file, and it's referenced in this vars file. So, you know, when we decrypt it, it's like, oh, okay, I can go here, and it makes sense. But after we encrypt it, so I'll encrypt it again, right? We go back to this vault file, and it's, you know, it's back to the way it was. And that's the vault pass, but like I said, not a huge deal in a lab environment. But so yeah, that's kind of the way the vault works, and you don't have to use a vault file, right? Like I put like a key and value so that way I could easily use them, but you literally can do a string value if you wanted to. And just to show you that, vault help. So encrypt string, and so you would do encrypt string help. Yeah. So you literally just say, oh, oops. I just want to show, because the encrypt string actually might help you more. But yeah, you literally just put the string to encrypt. Nick asks, so would you have to decrypt the vault creds in order to run the play, or can you reference it while it's encrypted? Good question. you do have to decrypt it. Ansible has to decrypt it. And so the reason I created that vault pass is so, let me see where it's declared though. So the reason I declared that .vault pass here, the file that contains the password in clear text, is you can put this in your configuration. You could say vault _ password _ file. And so Ansible on Playbook run will decrypt any sort of encrypted files using this password file in your configuration. So it decrypts it. Otherwise, every time you wanted to run a playbook, you would have to put in the -- ask vault pass or -- vault password file. You'd have to put that into the command line. And I'm sure there might be another way to do it as well. But so far, kind of what I've seen is you have to put this right into the command line every time, or you can just reference one password file, and that password, whatever string is in that password file, will be used to decrypt any encrypted variables. All right. So now that we've kind of busted through that, and I didn't explain any of the structure. All right, so we'll start with kind of looking at it all from, let me see if I can just do it. I guess I can't use tree. Okay, so this will work though. So along the left side here, we have group vars, host vars, playbooks, roles, and then down here just individual files like an inventory file, an Ansible config, a vault pass, and a git ignore file. So something that you kind of learn along the way reading through Ansible documentation is the structure and directory structure and variable precedence. So kind of the order in which variables are taken, because you can define variables at various locations, right? Whether it be the connection type, device connection type, the device host name, the credentials, but there's kind of different ways to do it. So let's look at the inventory, and then we'll go through host and group vars. So here we have the IOS-XE group, right? That's the group name, and then a host named CSR1. If you look in group vars, we have a file named IOS-XE, right? And all it's saying is Ansible Network OS equals iOS, right? That's a variable. So the key is you have to have a file name that matches the group name under your group vars directory if you want to use group vars. This is not mandatory at all. I'm just kind of showing how it scales a little bit because, as we, at least the people in chat and maybe those, watching as well, you may have a little bit of Ansible experience or at least understand you have playbooks, which are kind of the main workhorse of Ansible. But I always like to go into kind of how the sausage is made, if that's a good reference for it. Like what exactly makes up a playbook before, we'll actually look at a playbook. So, all right, so we have group vars. We have, these are just files, but they could be folders. Like you see, all is a folder because I'm actually introducing a couple different variables, and then like I said, I have that vault file as well. And so you look at the different group vars here. The only thing I made different in this was the Ansible Network OS. And you have to declare this because the Network OS helps Ansible understand what kind of device it's connecting to, right? So obviously anything in our inventory that falls under the NX-OS group is going to be a NX-OS, associated with the NX-OS Network OS. And then iOS-XE is the same thing, iOS. They don't have an iOS-XE, just to clarify. So that's it kind of for the group variables. Host vars are kind of the same thing, right? So we have two hosts, CSR1 and N9K1. Under host vars, I only have the one host identified, but you just have to have a file name that's the same as your host. So in this case, CSR1. Don't mind this mess right now. I am trying to work through something. But like in this case, right, I have an Ansible connection type as netconf. Because for this specific type, I was creating a playbook where I wanted to use netconf versus the variable defined here in the all, because this kind of goes into variable precedence. But the more specific you are, so like in this case, we're in group vars and it's in the all category, so it's kind of that catch-all, right? The Ansible connection type is network CLI, so it's that traditional SSH. But in this case, I actually wanted with the CSR to test netconf. And so in here, I declared Ansible connection again and then declared it as netconf. And so whenever I connect to the CSR now, it will always try to connect using netconf until I remove this line from this host vars file. So that's group vars and host vars. And just to show you, right, some playbooks, let's take a look at this one. So this, before we get to roles, so this is a very basic playbook. See, I mean, this is really unnecessary to put the connection type in the playbook because we already have it defined in the group vars file. So we don't even really need that because it's already defined. But basically, all we're doing is using the iOS fax module. So here we have a play, right, that has multiple tasks in it. So this one specifically will get the iOS fax. It uses the iOS fax module, which basically does all the work, and returns an output. And then the second task down here prints just the host name in the iOS version. So you might be like, all right, well, that doesn't tell me much, but we'll run the playbook and you'll kind of see. But essentially what this debug message here, what you see here, this module, it basically is a print statement, if you want to think of it that way. So it should print out at the end, the host name is whatever the device host name is. These are just reserved variable names. I think they're called magic variables, if I remember correctly. And so Ansible net host name is the magic variable for basically the device host name that's it's being ran against, the playbook's being ran against. And then the OS version is, once again, another magic variable that's called Ansible net version, which basically is the iOS version. All right. I think my device is already online. So I'm just going to go ahead and run this playbook. Ansible playbooks, because I'm in the playbooks directory. And this is important as well. You have to kind of remember this. Is if you start creating these directories and this kind of structure, you have to remember where you're at. So right now I'm in the root of this project. So I want to go into playbooks and then specifically the get iOS fax playbook. And I think I saw someone comment this on my Twitter whenever I posted the status that Ansible is going to kick my butt this week. Someone was like, yeah, my favorite part of debugging Ansible is just to put, and he just put like, I think it was like 5 to 10 V's in the comment. And, you know, for those that don't know Ansible, you might be like, what the heck's that about? So when you put -v, and the more V's you put, means the more verbose the output is, right? So if you put, I always like to put 4. 4 is like that magic number where it's probably overload, but you get all the data. Probably too much data. But yes, some guy was like, yeah, I just love whenever I wish I could read the comment. I still have it up, Twitter up right now. But yeah, he was like, yeah, whenever I have to debug Ansible playbooks, I just do dash, and then he just like did like a ton of V's. I thought it was pretty funny. So we'll run it. How about this? We'll run it without any sort of the debugging or, you know, kind of the verbosity, and we'll see what it looks like. Assuming that it runs and connects to my device. Oh, duh. Connection type is netconf is not valid for this module. So literally what I just told you about this being overridden, it's that's exactly what happened. It got overridden. So we'll delete that, save it, and now we'll run it again. And what it will do now is it will actually use that group vars in that all category. The in here we have, under the all folder, we have the Ansible connection as network CLI. Okay, so as you can see, when you don't have any, verbosity in the output, there's not much here. Now I don't have much to print out. Like I didn't store any variables or do much printing at all. The only thing I printed was here at the bottom. And you'll see here the host name is yang-r1 and the OS version is 17.3.2. And so just to show you, so we actually were talking to this router here, this CSR. netconf2, and you guys already know the username password because I showed you it earlier. But if we do a show ver, you can see version, maybe not on stream, it might be kind of small, but you see 17.3.2. And you already see that the host name is yang-r1. So, there we go. And so, yeah, the host name is yang-r1 and the OS version is 17.3.2. And that's using, like I said, those magic variables. Now, let's add a little flavor to this. So I put 2 V's afterwards, dash VV. So that will print out a little more, right? So we only asked it to print out this message here at the bottom, which you saw, at the very beginning. But now it's actually going to print out all the Ansible, the iOS facts that it built, or I'm sorry, that it got from the device. And so just to show you what iOS facts looks like, we'll just create a new file here. Hold on, I'm trying to do my keyboard shortcuts. There we go. And so let's just save this as iosfacts.json. I'm going to delete this, but I always use the .json extension so that way I can format the document and it looks real nice. So this is kind of what I mean whenever I say that Ansible can have to me, Ansible has its place as far as like your introduction to clicking a button and being able to hit a bunch of devices at the same time just to collect data, not even to say to configure, right? Because if you know me and my, what I've talked about and preached on these streams is I think everyone should start out in the testing and validation space of your network before you push any configuration. It's read-only and you'll learn a lot about your network. So it's kind of like it's safe to do and you learn a lot. And that's probably better than just blindly pushing out config. So the magic variables I was talking about before, you can see how they're represented here. So you actually have Ansible net config, and you can see how small my horizontal scroll bar is. This is literally the entire configuration stored in here as one big string. You could pull this variable out, right, and do some regex magic and find the value that you want out of the raw config. Would not advise that, but that's, you could do that. But you even get things, how much space is free and total in the boot flash. That Ansible net hostname magic variable I told you about, the image, the net interfaces. So it doesn't give you all the information or configuration under every single interface. But in this case, we have 4 virtual interfaces or 4 interfaces on a virtual router on the CSR. So you'll see I thought it was a list. Maybe not. But you'll see that, we have a JSON object for every interface. And hopefully you can see with the curly braces. So we have gigabit Ethernet 1, bandwidth description, IPv4, whether it's up, the MAC address, MTU, operational state, and so on. So it's some decent information, right? So you see all the interfaces here, and then down at the bottom here, you get the Ansible net iOS type, the memory, the model, neighbors. I don't know how it gathers that, whether it does any sort of CDP information, or how that's gathered. But and here's the net version. Matt asks, sorry I missed it, but this is the whole Git iOS fax stored as a JSON file? Yeah, so what I did was, so technically what you could do, Matt, is you could register this, the output of this as a variable, and the way you could do that, you would do that is register, and just maybe call it device. We'll call it device info. So doing this, it will register iOS fax as a variable called device info that you then can use anywhere else. So I mean, since you asked, I'll go ahead and I'll show you what I mean here. Oops, that's my caps lock. So I'll create another task called print iOS fax. So I'll use the debug module to do this. And what I'll do is I'll print device info. Now device info does have a standard output that you can get to, so we'll just see though. But I'll let that run as I kind of finalize. Oh, actually I need to reference it here. I think I need to reference, yeah, it should be referenced as a variable, but we'll see. Oops. Oops. All right, so I'm gonna run it without the, the verbosity of what we were looking at before. But to go back to the JSON file, yeah, I basically, and there you go, you saw it kind of, we'll take a look, but you can see right here, like I printed it out in the terminal, like within the playbook, but I just copy and pasted it from the terminal into this JSON file. But you can see the end, this is the end of both files here. Yeah, so you have Ansible net model, but basically you can parse out whatever you want from this iOS fax and store it in a variable. You can use it in a loop. You can use it in conditionals. That's a very interesting thing. And actually, let me show you what that looks like here. Get rid of the netconf stuff. Actually, I'm going to delete this file now too. We'll save. Delete. Move the trash. Okay. Matt says, awesome. How would you navigate down into that? Might be a very noob question. No, that's a good question. So the way you navigate into it is you basically, it's a JSON object, right? So whenever you gather the information within your playbook, you can actually call on it directly. You can call like Ansible net hostname. I think that's at the bottom here if I remember. Oh no, it's at the top. Oh, but net version I think is down at the bottom. Right, so you can see I collected the information, and then with the double curly braces, that's kind of your Jinja 2 syntax for a variable, to print out a variable. So you see Ansible net version, I call out here, and so it basically addresses this key, calls on this key, and returns this value here. So hopefully that kind of answers your question. Now, if you wanted to, let me scroll up to the top here. Right, so you're printing out the message. So I printed out, just to kind of start from the very top, whenever I gather all this information, I stored it in a variable called device_info. All I did was print out device info, whatever was stored in that variable. And you can see right after this message, it jumps right into a curly brace. So we're right into the JSON object. And so you could, like, if you wanted to access it, you would maybe say, like, if you wanted to get a specific information, let's say this wasn't iOS facts, this was something else, this was another JSON object, you would just drill down as you normally would. You could use, dot notation, but you could drill down in, right? So just specifically around iOS facts, you don't need to do that because all that's kind of, once you have the facts, you can then reference it using these, like I said, magic variables in your playbook. All right, so I think that's enough with the iOS facts. What was the next thing? So this one, Hanabyte, actually, hold on, sorry. Hanabyte asks, what are your thoughts on the future of Ansible in our space in regard to automating more complex enterprise networks? That's a good question. I think I kind of mentioned in the beginning, it really is a situational, thing, especially anything with automation. There's a level of competency where it comes to your team, and really it's not even about like the technical skills, in my opinion. I think it's more about the culture, right? Because being able to teach this like Ansible, right, or Python, or using a library like NetMiko, right? Being able to use that and teach someone that, I think, is the easy part. The hard part is to then say, okay, this is how we're doing things from now on. We're using our single source of truth on how we configure NTP, right? To show what's just on the screen, is using this NTP playbook. We're not logging into the CLI unless something's broken, right? Unless we're down bad and we need to fix something. So the processes are the hardest, I think. As far as tooling, my personal opinion, I think a lot of network engineers will, when they dive into the different tools and then understand how to do the same task using Python and learning just some of the basic practices and guidelines of Python, the quote unquote the Zen of Python, you kind of start understanding how easy and flexible it is. And I'm starting, like, the way, I guess I'll just, without rambling too much further, at the end of the day, we're network engineers and we know how the protocols work. We know how to configure the network, get everything up and running, break things, fix things, and troubleshoot and so on. But really, at the end of the day, we're just manipulating data, right? So whether your data is in plain text or, in a CLI, unstructured data, didn't mean plain text, or structured data that is easy, you can manipulate programmatically, it shouldn't matter, right? So to me, I think whatever tool can help your team and that fits your culture, then that's the way you should go. So hopefully that answers your question, Hanabyte. Because like I said, I personally don't ever count any tool out, only because I don't know anyone's situation, right? I don't know your perspective, where your team may be at. And like I said, I'll say it over and over again. I started, my very first automation script was an Ansible playbook. The first time I ever clicked enter and configured anything on a network device, I had this ISR 4K, obviously not on the network, just sitting at my desk. I just had like a little local LAN set up. I don't even know how I just plugged in my computer, plugged in a little switch or whatever, completely physically off the network. And I remember creating a playbook to configure, and I actually have it here. I don't think it was the exact syntax, but to configure IP helper addresses under VLAN SVIs, because the task or the problem at the time was we had the DHCP server IP address changed, right? And so we didn't have any sort of load balancer IP that a virtual IP or anything like that where it could hit that and then disseminate. They were all to individual servers. So we had to go through and figure out a way, okay, how do we take out, do a no IP helper address under every SVI and then configure the new helper addresses and do it in a way that we can migrate all of our, network devices to this new helper address. And that's the reason I kind of started with Ansible. I heard it was a cool platform. It was a buzzword back when I, was looking at 2017, right? So I took a look at it, and it solved the problem. So, yeah. So anyways, I'll stop. I know I can ramble sometimes. So let's see. Where was I? Oh, duh. So the configure playbook, right? So we got facts, and like I said, if you're starting out in network automation, getting information and learning about your network through network automation, whether that be telemetry or Ansible Git iOS facts, which completely separate. I don't want to say they're the same at all. Either way is a good place to start out, right? You're getting data from your network, and then you can do whatever you want with it. So, all right. Let's see. All right, so configure. Oh, no problem, Hunter Byte. Hey, I appreciate you asking. I really do. I try to provide an opinion, that hopefully you can take and be like, oh, he wasn't just blowing smoke up my butt, right? He was trying to actually answer the question. I can't condemn things, and I can definitely promote things that I think are really cool, and I'll definitely give you my opinion, my personal opinion. But as far as pushing automation, it's such a new, there's so many options out there. I don't want to say it's new in any way, because I follow people on Twitter that have been doing it for a long time. But there's just so many options out there, and it's just going to get more flooded as vendors catch on and vendors are doing things. You'll hear about vendor X, vendor A, vendor B, this is their automation tool. At the end of the day, we're just manipulating data. And you want to do it in a way that's the least error prone, and that you can kind of borrow some of the tried and true practices. And that's why a lot of people are trying to look at, I'm sure you've heard CI/CD pipelines. It's not just because, oh, they're cool, right? It sounds cool. It sounds like, oh man, this guy knows what he's talking about. He's a software engineer. But no, they've been around for a while for software developers, right? And so if we can adapt that to networking, why not, right? At the end of the day, we're manipulating data as well. The difference with software developers are that they can compile their software, and if it breaks, that's fine. They'll go back and fix it and before they release it. The problem with the network is, as soon as you push that code out there, you might just start seeing, red lights pop up on your network monitoring tools because it hits right away. So yeah, but might as well, use the tried and true practices that have been around for a little bit. Okay, I digress. So the iOS configure playbook here, we're using the network CLI again, hitting the IOS-XE group of hosts, which, as you know, is just the CSR1 device. And we're configuring an NTP server. So this is probably, if you're ever looking at Ansible to configure a device, this iOS_config module is probably your best bet. And I will say, I guess before I move further, I've been mentioning these module names. This is using Ansible 2.9. Ansible, for those that may not know, Ansible's kind of gone through a weird versioning crisis where they went from like 2.9, 2.10, and then they just shot up to like, I think they're on like version 4, version 5 or something. I don't know. Their versioning got weird, and then they also migrated away from these module names and started doing what's called collections. So instead of being iOS_config, they might have a Cisco collection, which then has an iOS collection. There's some more inheritance involved. So it kind of makes sense, but I'm just warning you that if you look at Ansible documentation, you will not probably find iOS config unless you look at the Ansible 2.9 documentation. So Ansible config, using the lines parameter, literally this is just your global config. So anything, this could be logging host, this could be NTP, this could be whatever, which I think helps a lot, right? It's global. And there's a lot of global config that you could standardize on. SNMP, logging, NTP, really anything, right? Anything at that global level. Where it gets a little interesting and where there's a little more logic involved is down here, where I already kind of went through the example of configuring IP helpers on every interface, right? So here we have the lines that we'll put under the interface, and then we have a couple more keys. So here we have a parents key that will actually, sorry about that highlighting, I'm gonna quit highlighting everything. But the parents key has interface and then the double curly braces for item.key. And so you kind of have to read it from, I always like to say that when you see a lot of these like loops or conditionals, read it from the bottom up, and I think it will make some more sense for you. So you'll see so at the very bottom there's when. So when is kind of like an if statement. So when Ansible Network OS equals iOS. So this is cool because if you remember, Ansible Network OS is something that we got from, let me see. Oh, it's still here. Where'd it go? Ansible Network OS. Oh, duh. It's not in there. The Ansible Network OS is under the group variables, right? I had to, and you could put this, I kind of have mine organized already into group variables and host variables, but you could put this right into your inventory file, right? I could say Ansible Network OS equals iOS. So, but regardless, let's say I was running this playbook against every host in my network. Only the hosts that have a network OS that is iOS would get this configured, would have this configuration. So let's say I actually found something interesting, and maybe it's outdated, but I was trying to look at creating a logging host, right? Logging host, and then the IP address of the syslog server. I found out that Nexus had a separate logging configuration. I think theirs was like logging server and then the IP address of the syslog server, whereas iOS is logging host and then the IP address. So in that case, you'd have two different plays potentially, and because two things. One, you would be using two different modules. So in this case, we're using iOS config, and then with Nexus, we'd be using NX-OS config, right, to configure Nexus. And then we would say to use the when clause. So if the network OS equal iOS, then we would use this, and then obviously we create a separate task for the NX-OS, and that would allow you to create different syntax and so on. So going back to this example, if it equals iOS, we're going to loop over the Ansible net interfaces, which if you remember is a dictionary, right? I just want to show it to you here. Right, so Ansible net interfaces right here, and this was found from the iOS facts, and we're using a filter called dict to items, which changes this dictionary into, let me make sure I'm telling you this right, because I don't want to just be like, oh, it takes you from a dictionary into items, because that doesn't help you out. I think this allows you to me see. I know it breaks it down into key and values. I don't know what just happened. I don't know if it took a screenshot or something. I did not mean to do that. Dict to items. Use the dict to items to transform a dictionary into a list of items suitable for looping. That's exactly what I was thinking. Yes, so this is what I was trying to like. It was in my head because I just read this the other day. So it takes a dictionary and then it transforms it into a key and value. So like here, right, application's your key, payment's your value, and you see it's a list now, right, that you can iterate over. So let's say item 1 in your list has a little dash here. The key is application, the value is payment. So going back to our example, here, we had an Ansible net interfaces. So this whole list right here, right, we'd have a list, and the first item would have all of gigabit Ethernet 1 in it. The key for this first list item would be gigabit Ethernet 1. The value would be all this bandwidth, description, everything to, everything I'm highlighting here, right? All that would be your value. And further down, I just can't highlight it. So here we have item.key, which would be this gigabit Ethernet 1, right? So if you put it all together, we loop through all the network interfaces, and we're just getting the key out of that list. And so we're doing interface and then fill in the variable with the item.key. And the item is kind of that iterative, like whatever you're on in the loop. So if you're on item, it could be item 1 in the loop, it could be item 2, whatever it is, we're going to take that item and we're going to pull the key from it and use that. So obviously be interface gigabit Ethernet 1, gigabit Ethernet 2 on the second iteration, 3 on this third, and so on. And so the parent's key here, we would put on interface gigabit Ethernet 1, and the parents is basically if you need to go into like a sub mode of the configuration, you would do interface gigabit Ethernet 1, and then underneath of that you would have like IP address, description, your duplex speed, whatever you wanted to configure that you normally would configure. But in this case, you put the IP helper underneath of that interface. But so you have to have this parent's key to say, okay, first, before you put any of these lines in, I want you to put this, put in this parent key or this parent value, and then go through the lines of config. So that's that. I'm going to go ahead and run this one as well. So that way you can kind of see. And just so it's not already configured, what are we doing? IP helpers and an NTP server. I don't think I saved it last time whenever I was testing this out. Let's see. Show run NTP. All right, so NTP is not configured, and I know it's really hard to see on the stream. And then I'll just do gig 1 and gig 2, and you can see for both gig 1 and gig 2, there's no IP helper addresses. Okay. So we'll go ahead and do the iOS configure, and we'll let it go. So remember, it's going to get the facts from the device, and then it's going to configure NTP at the global level, and then it's going to configure IP helpers on every single interface, 1 through 4. And you can see that. It'll tell you that here in yellow. It'll say what it's changed. Nick asked a very good question. So Nick says, what if there is an interface you didn't want that config on? Good question. So I forget how I did it. I think I used a filter because remember from my story, I just wanted the VLAN, the SVIs. Somehow I put in a filter to where I use regex, I believe, to say just VLAN star. So whatever VLAN and then the number, didn't matter what was after VLAN, but interface VLAN star. And it it went through that way. So I would say, to answer your question, maybe a regex or using a custom filter. And whenever I say filter, anything, you put this little bar in, and then you could say whatever afterwards. But I'm pretty sure I use regex, Nick, to answer your question. If you had a predefined list, so let's say you had a network where all the interface names were the same. Yeah, that's exactly. Yeah, Nick put the regex in the chat, the period and the star. But let's say you had a predefined list. You can actually create a manual list in this Ansible loop, right? So right here, I just said, hey, go to the Ansible net interfaces that you find in the iOS facts and loop through them all, right? But let's say you knew like every interface is gigabit Ethernet 1, gigabit Ethernet 2. You could literally put them as static variables or static, basically create a static list in this playbook. All right. So you can see changed. 3 were okay, 2 changed. To be honest with you, oh, there we go. I was like, I know they normally talk like the task. It normally counts the tasks that changed, right? It says 2 changed. So NTP servers, it changed CSR. So this task changed the CSR1 host, and then configuring the IP on every interface, that also changed the CSR. So you can see 2 tasks changed the CSR host. And if you had more hosts, it would show like multiple hosts. And so we'll go back to the CSR real quick, do our checks. So show run pipe include NTP. You can see there's 2 NTP servers. And then just taking a look at gig 1 and gig 2, you can now see that there's 2 IP helper commands. Yeah, and Nick made a good point. So he says he loves how Ansible is idempotent. For those that don't know kind of what idempotent means is, Ansible will verify, and it will go through and check if, let's say, and I'll actually show you the idempotency now, but let's say we already have IP helper addresses, this IP helper address on gigabit Ethernet 4, right? It was already on one of the IPs or on one of the interfaces. Obviously here it wasn't on any, so that's why every interface changed. But if we run this again, Ansible will be smart enough to say, oh, okay, I already see that configuration. I'm not going to touch it, which is great. And that's where the idempotency comes from and what Nick mentioned. So, Nick, I appreciate you bringing that up. That's actually one thing I wanted to bring up tonight. So you can see here all these, right? Instead of saying changed equals 2, it just says OK equals 3. So what that did was Ansible said, okay, hey, I already see you have these NTP servers configured. I'm not changing anything. We're good to go. So I didn't change anything in this run. And then same thing with all the IP helpers. Hey, those IP helpers are already done. Now what if I did this? I said, oops, my NTP server here, that was supposed to be a 9 instead of an 8. So if I save this and then run this playbook again, we should see NTP server, that task show is changed, but the IP helper should stay okay because we didn't change anything in that. So we'll see what that looks like here in a second. See, as you can tell there, that is now configure NTP servers task says that the CSR1 has changed and the IP helpers are still good. So yeah, the idempotency, that's huge. There's let's see, I got a few now, and Clay's here. Oh yeah, I'm sure Clay, I always learn something from Clay when he's here. Nick says, wild how I'm learning about regex in the Kirk Byers learning Python for network engineers right now, and the convo is still relevant somewhat. Dude, if you think regex, that is not going away ever. Some of the smartest tools out there, it's just regex behind the curtains. So yeah, you'll always run into regex. So definitely keep that in mind. I wouldn't say you have to study it. Like I wouldn't study regex like you would like a BGP path selection or anything, but just by using it, you'll start kind of getting down like what the different patterns are. So yeah, dude, regex will be around for a while. Sorry if I stole your thunder on item potency. Not a problem, Nick. Yeah, I'm glad you reminded me, actually. Clay says, not all Ansible modules are idempotent. It only is if the vendor programmed it to be that way. I've come across some that are not. That's actually good to know, Clay. I did not know that. I didn't. Now that you say that, it makes a lot of sense. But I did not know that not all modules were idempotent. So that's actually. I'm trying to think because I'm pretty sure I installed a module from Ansible Galaxy one time and I used it and it kept saying it changed even though the item was already configured. I forget what the module name was though. That's weird. Yeah, that just sparked it for me. Yeah, but so anyways, yeah, good to know from Clay and for everyone watching. Yeah, it has to be programmed into the module versus if you install, and I just mentioned the name Ansible Galaxy. Ansible Galaxy is kind of that open source, it's where people can contribute and create modules. And I believe Clay actually has a module out there on Ansible Galaxy because I've used it. So Clay has contributed to the Ansible Galaxy universe. If you want to call it that. So yeah, so you can install modules from there. You can call on them in Playbooks. It allows that extensibility, quote unquote extensibility that Ansible can provide. So that's where kind of I think Clay was going is, some of those modules that you install may not have that idempotency. Okay, and then the last thing I wanted to talk about tonight was, so on the DevNet Expert exam topics, there's the use of using multiple plugins, right? So Network CLI is one that I think everyone knows because that's what we deal with every day. But there's a HTTP API plugin, which I still have to mess around with a little bit. So I didn't want to really talk about it too much tonight. I was trying to get some more hands-on with it, but I did get some hands-on with netconf. So as you guys know, this netconf, restconf, Yang data models are huge on this exam. And just to kind of provide a little bit of detail with that, if I look just in this, right, 30% of this exam, right, is found in this 2.0 infrastructure as code. Look how many times we see restconf or netconf or Yang, right? 2.5, right? Create a restconf or payconf, restconf or netconf payload. 2.6, create a netconf filter. 2.7, netconf or restconf, give it a Yang analysis tools. Use a connection plugin, HTTP API, which could be restconf, and they put that in the Ansible documentation, and netconf. I mean, so you're looking at out of 10 subtopics, you're looking at least, 3 or 4? 1, 2, 3, 4? 4 that relate back to netconf or restconf, which, oh, by the way, is related back to Yang. So I'm starting to I'm going back through that, and well, I completely missed NSO. NSO is 100% based on Yang, so you might as well just call this Yang as well, right? So you're looking at over probably at least half of the topics relate back to Yang, restconf, netconf. So I've been experimenting with netconf, and I've been creating the RPC, the payloads, using Yang Suite. So for those that aren't familiar, I actually had a whole conversation on this probably a couple months ago now. I have to look back at the VODs, but Yang Suite is a Yang analysis tool, and it allows you to explore Yang modules, read documentation, download Yang modules from devices, and even send payloads, netconf, restconf payloads. So, besides that week that I was looking at it and then that stream, I haven't really dove too deep into the Yang suite. I've done the very basic stuff, right? Got Yang modules installed, reviewed them, messed around, created some RPCs, payloads, and messed around with the netconf and restconf. But I figured this would be a good time to jump back into it. So I actually set this up yesterday, and I'm not going to go through like how to set it all up, but I basically created an IOS-XE and a NX-OS module repository, which you use these module repositories to create Yang data. I think they're called Yang sets, like data sets, module sets. So you import all the data models and you into these repositories, then you create individual model sets from them, which then you can use to create payloads. So I created 2. Jeez, sorry, that's my dog. Chill. Go upstairs. Jeez, he's like laying right behind me. Apologize if that was... I could hear that through my headset, so I know it was loud for you guys. And so... Where was I? Oh my gosh. So I created 2 modules here, 2 repositories. And one I pulled, so you can do it in a couple ways. You can upload the Yang data models directly from like your local PC, or you can use netconf to actually pull them from the network device, right? So the capabilities and what's on the network device, the different models there. Or you can secure copy, same thing. Or you can use Git. You literally can clone them from Git into this local repository. Nick asks, can we see your dog at least? No, he's finally calmed down a little bit. Maybe someday on stream. He doesn't normally hang out behind me whenever I'm actually streaming. It's just tonight he's staying close. We're getting some weather here on the East Coast, and so he's kind of just staying by. And sorry, Nick, I didn't actually see your other question here. You said, speaking of netconf, any resources you recommend to get practice and knowledge for git/edit configs with this? I get the theory, but no practical hands-on. Good question. This tool. To answer, this tool and a test device. Preferably at least using like a Cisco CSR or like a Catalyst 8000V or any virtual device. That's my personal preference. But if you're trying to use a physical device, you'd have to buy at least I think 36 Catalyst 3650 switches support IOS-XE 16.x. So yeah. So anyways, you can just clone down these Yang models. And so I did it 2 ways. With the IOS-XE, I did use netconf and actually pulled them from the CSR 1000V. And you can see them all right here. And then with the Nexus, I actually used Git and just downloaded them from the Git repository, the 9.3.6. And so those are kind of my 2 ways of doing it. And let's see. Yeah. Sorry, oh, duh, I'm on the wrong one. Jeez. Dude, this is like how I know I'm just like it's been a long day. Yeah, so I was like, I'm in IOS-XE. Why is there Nexus modules? So you can see they're all here. And so once you import them all, like I said, you can make module sets and they're a little more individualized. To connect to your devices, use a device profile, fill out the credentials, how you want to connect to it. And then to actually interact with the devices, you go down to protocols and netconf. And then, Nick, to answer your question, this is your practical. This is where you want to use your practical, get your practical knowledge and labbing. So I didn't really go over YangSet, but you take the repository and you can put individual modules into YangSets. So like for me, I actually broke this down into, like, for example, routing. And you can see I just got BGP and OSPF. The nice thing with Yang Suite is because you can define and import, think of them as almost like classes or functions, right? In like Python, you might define like what an IPv4 address is. Well, you're not going to put that definition in every single Yang data model, so you inherit things. So any of those like inheritance models, they include that for you. So you can see here, like IOS-XE-IP. This model probably is just dedicated to defining an IP address, an IPv4 address. But you can see here, right? I got BGP, and I'll load the module here. And it's parsing it out. So Yang Suite will go through, it'll read through the model, it'll parse through it, it'll import different whatever modules it needs, right? Like I said, the inheritance from defining something as simple as an IPv4 address to defining what an ASN number is, right? Because the nice thing with Yang data models is they have that constraint. They can say, hey, if you want an ASN, it's gonna be an integer between this and this, right? Between this number range, and so that's kind of where that comes from. And so it's loading up here, and once this loads up, I'll jump back to the code. But I just wanted to show you. So the IOS-XE, and then from here it shows you the IOS-XE native model, and then all the different kind of modules within that, or containers, right? So you can kind of go through and see them that way. But it's nice. I think this is a good way. If you want to explore the models, I would recommend using the Explore tab versus the Protocols tab. The Protocols is more for creating your payloads. It's not for like exploring. Like if you wanted to know more about like what's in the BGP model, then you would probably want to do here. And I'll just show you this one real quick, because this is what I meant to show you. But you would want to look at the Explore tab. So hopefully that kind of answers your question, Nick, with getting practical. This is honestly the best way I've gotten so far. And honestly, I'm definitely not a Yang guru. I still have a lot to learn, and I want to learn more about it. But like if I click on IOS-XE, the module, you can see a lot of information from here. You can see the different imports, right? Going back to that inheritance, like what other modules does it import from? So what are some of its dependencies? You can see the namespace, which is very important, the prefix, the different namespace prefixes, and then it'll actually have a link. Well, this one just has to the RFC, but some of them you actually can have a link. But anyways, I think this is very neat. I think this is an easy way to do it. And then another resource before we go back to the code is the Yang catalog. If you're not familiar with that, I think it's just yangcatalog.org. That actually creates I don't know what's going to come up, so I apologize ahead of time. Okay, cool. I thought it was yangcatalog.org, but I've never, I normally just Google everything. But yeah, go to this website. You can actually view they actually have visuals of how with arrows and all that stuff. So I think that should help you out. Okay. So what did I want to show you? Oh, okay. So real quick, kind of the last thing before we wrap up, the netconf module. So I actually have to go back here and plug in Remember we deleted that earlier, that Ansible connection netconf. So I put that back in, so that way we're using the netconf connection type. And so this one's pretty cool. I actually got a little pissed with this, I'm not gonna lie. Last night I was messing around with it because normally I'm creating, like, using NC client, which is a Python library. You do all this within the code, but obviously with Ansible, you put it in via parameters, right? You're using the DSL, right? You're using the specific language to Ansible and the way that it's abstracted for you. So I had to read through a lot of the different parameters, but once I got it working, like, obviously it's great now, and I know exactly what to look for. Let's see. Nick asked, have you played with imports or includes in Ansible? Only the roles, and I didn't even get to the roles tonight. That might be for another day, but no. Besides importing roles, I haven't inherited playbooks. I think I'm assuming that's what you mean. I don't think I have. I've been using Ansible for a while, like on and off, so I'm sure somewhere in there I have tried it, but not recently, no. Okay, so as mentioned, using the Ansible, the netconf connection type, and then we're using the netconf_config module. And then if you look this up, let me pull it up here, Ansible netconf config, there we go. So they're two different things. There's the netconf config module, and then there's the netconf connection type. We're using both. The connection type is just under the hood, and I learned this. I actually have to send an email. You actually have to have NC client installed in your Python virtual environment to have the netconf connection type work. Out of the box, this candidate workstation VM, the DevNet expert VM, doesn't have NC client installed in its Ansible virtual environment. So I had to just install it. But and you can see here the below requirements are needed to execute this module, NC client. So I guess I got that backwards. To use the netconf config module, you have to have NC client installed. But to use the netconf config module, you're using the netconf connection type. So, you know what I mean? It kind of all runs together there. And you see that all the different parameters here. I'm not going to go through all of them. Literally all of them. Like, there's a lot. But there's a lot of options when it comes to netconf as well, right? So you see these examples. They configure NTP on the device. The first one is actually the one we're going to be using, which is actually using a file, an XML file, versus copy and pasting this code. Because I tried this, and let me tell you, I had quite the time, and the lack of error messages of valuable error messages I got when trying to use using this content parameter and then putting it in as like a raw string value into the playbook I had quite the time, let's just say that. But I did get it to work using an XML file. So let me see. All right, so here I changed. Some of them were defaults, but I wanted to put them in there to be verbose and kind of as like a reminder to myself. Default operation is merge. Host key verify. I think it's default to be on, which I thought was it is secure. Don't get me wrong. Yeah. So I think the default's yes on this. So it verifies it must be present. Sets no. So yeah, so it does the host key verify, which I thought was kind of odd. Like I said, I'm not the most secure when it comes with netconf. I'm still kind of in that learning process, so I'm sure, it's just, I guess it's always on by default. I mean, I had to turn it off even in the Ansible config, but having to do it again through the task or through the module was different for me. Hex. I missed a couple here. Hex says, I appreciate everything you do. Keep it up. You inspire me to pursue the DevNet expert cert. Thank you and see you next time. Hey Hex, thanks for stopping by. Thank you. Those are kind words. Thanks. Yeah. Just thank you for stopping by, and I hopefully you do, if you do pursue it, that you can look back on some of these videos, and I'm always available. Feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. But thanks for stopping by. Nick, you asked, can you pull pip modules from a lab repository if something is missing? I don't know if this is something you should check for. Presume you already have it on the workstation. Yeah, so I actually reached out to Hank Preston about it, because I actually found a couple other things as well, and he was cool with it. He's just to tell him, if I find anything else. So I actually have to remember to message him about the NC client not being installed. He did mention that everything will be available. Everything that you need will be available on test day, because you have to remember they went through and had to kind of scrape some things out of this VM. So I'm sure little things here and there. So for example, I did bring up about, remember when last week's stream, I couldn't find Minikube and we had to revert back to using Docker Desktop. So I just mentioned that to him. There's another thing, but anyways, yeah, they seem like they're open to feedback on the candidate workstation, right? But yeah, he mentioned that everything should be there, so I don't have to do any sort of pip installs or anything like that. Obviously, if something's missing, I'll bring it up. But yeah, I imagine everything's probably fine on test day. Okay, so netconf config, here's some parameters. We're going to target the running config, and our default operation is we're going to merge. So if you remember, this kind of goes back to your CRUD operations, right? Your create, what is the R? Not replace. Yeah, replace, right? Create, replace, update, delete, yeah. Sorry. So this is kind of equivalent, if you were to do a put request, right? Kind of merge, versus, or a patch, versus a post that may just replace. So that's I always try to relate it back to that, because I know a lot of people are into messing around with REST APIs and your CRUD operations. So yeah, so it's not replacing. There are some different options. You could do a default option to merge, replace, and there was one other. And so anyways, we're just merging config, and we're targeting the running data store. So I think I've talked about this before. Netconf, you have your candidate, your startup, and your running data stores. With candidate kind of being optional. But so I'm targeting the running config, the running data store, which is the running config. And then for content, I showed you kind of two different ways. You could do a lookup using that kind of this lookup function to look up a file, or you can put the actual string. I actually commented out here just as reference. You could put this into the playbook, but this is just cleaner and it's easier to replace. So let's say I wanted to use this XML file in other playbooks. Instead of copying and pasting this over and over again, I could just reference this one file. And just to show you what the XML looks like, I generated this actually with Yang Suite. So you don't need the config tags and you don't need your target tags. And that's something that Yang Suite, and really any RPC you'll see, you'll have kind of the RPC, and then you'll have your target tag of what data store you're going to target, because remember, you put all of that in as parameters up here. And so I kind of just went through and put the XML, interfaces, the interface, the name, and description. I just updated the description. That's the only thing I did. I don't know why that's trying to be dragged. And that's it. So yeah, you look up the file. That was the XML file, and then it will execute that against the running data store. And let's do iOS .conf. And hopefully this runs successfully. Nick says, I wonder if you have to worry about specific versions of a particular module. For Ansible, you mean? Ansible, you would have to worry about, because the modules are different. And you can see here, like, the parameter host key verify is deprecated. I mean, yeah, it's because it is an older version of Ansible, but Ansible is, like I said, all over the place with its versioning right now. So, looks like an XPath there. Yeah, I know. I wanted to, XPath is easier to me, and it's actually getting easier as I'm practicing. So, yeah. Python or whatever in general. You have to worry about specific versions of a particular module. Yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to understand your question. Specific versions of a particular module. I mean, yeah, with Ansible particularly, yeah. And then you said with Python, I mean, yeah, obviously different versions of the different, dependencies in the libraries. Yeah, for sure. You'll have to worry about those. The Yang data modules, as far as like if you're talking from that perspective, I think we talked about it in a previous stream as well. Like, they're aimed not to be backwards compatible, but yeah, doesn't mean they always are. But that's also why, like, if you look through the Yang GitHub, you'll see the different iOS versions, with whether it's new Yang models or modules, or whatever. That's kind of why they're broken up in that way as well. So, anyways, okay. So it worked, or it says it worked, right? It says okay. There's some warnings here. Deprecation warning. Unable to load netconf plugin for network OS. So this netconf plugin, the reason it's popping up and saying it's falling back to the default plugin is the default plugin is basically like your NC client. The netconf plugin you could do with different iOS versions. I think XR is on the list. Junos has a netconf plugin with an Ansible. I think Nexus does as well, NX-OS. So that's what that means there. So it's not an error message, it's just telling you that's falling back to the default plugin. So if we go to CML and netconf2 G4, the description says configured via netconf. So, and because it said okay, that means it was configured like that. So just to make you believe it actually does work, I'm just going to call it configured via netconf and just add a number to the end. And we'll run it again so that way it actually changes the config, or I'm sorry, the description, and then that way it's you guys can believe me that I didn't actually just set it up that way. It says, if having to maintain an exact environment for an app, sometimes a newer version of a module can break your app. Everything new is hard as I'm working through Anki flashcards. After a week or so, it doesn't get easier. I get better. Yeah. I mean, you're right. It's just working through making yourself better every day, just the consistency. And trust me, when you're doing self-study, and I mean, I'm sure you feel it too, Nick, like when you, especially like DevCore, like it kind of, on top of like just a lot of self-studying, and like there's already only a finite number of people that are studying for that particular exam, especially like the DevCore and really definitely the DevNet expert, the lab exam. That consistency is key, and you sometimes can get lost in that. right? You sometimes can get lost because you don't have, like, you are kind of by yourself with it. And on top of it, you're being introduced to so many new topics. You're being introduced to a lot of software development practices, new tools, potentially new platforms. So, yeah, man, just you definitely are a grinder. I mean, I see you, like, Twitter and on Discord we talk a lot too. So you crush it with the DevCore studies. So, yeah, just keep up the consistency. You're crushing it. It says it's a lot of material, hard to remember all the details, have to review material again and again. Yeah, 100%. You just have to keep reviewing it and then applying it, especially with anything related to programming or automation and stuff. You got to apply it at some point too. So, all right, let's go back to Firefox. And you'll see description configured via netconf 2. So that matches. And you could do that with, right now it just says description, but you can do IP address, you can do, anything of that nature. So I'm just switching it back, actually. So I just deleted that. And it'll go back out, do an edit config operation, and you'll see it changed again, but I literally just changed it back. Let's see. So description is configured via netconf. So that's kind of all I had for tonight. I was hoping to cover roles and the HTTP API connection type, which is your RESTconf, your NX API. But it's always good. I've never like pressed to cover every little thing I wanted to, because I would much rather have good conversation with the chat and talk through things. So if you have any questions, as always, message me on Twitter. You can DM me privately, or you can post something on my feed, or tag me in something or whatever. Always down to talk, whether it's life, network automation, whatever you want to talk about. As far as kind of the next streams, so going back here, so we're done Ansible, the stream at least. I'm going to be doing some things over the weekend with it, but so we're doing I'm finishing Ansible this week. Next stream, next week, we're doing a CI/CD pipeline in GitLab. I'm actually going to probably follow a DevNet Learning Lab using NSO. So this, if you're here, I would highly recommend next week, because I think it'll be really cool. Because I'll actually, we'll be going through a learning lab, kind of like what we did with, I think, NSO originally. So definitely tune in next week. But after next week, I'm trying to plan one last big stream, like a grand finale, to go through everything, or mostly everything we've talked about up to this point. So whether it's Flask or telemetry or configuration, testing and validation, I'm trying to put everything together into one big stream. And I think I mentioned this before, but I'm trying to do probably around like a 4 to 5 hour stream on like a Saturday, so that way others can join in. I know 8 p.m. Eastern is kind of a different time, like kind of stinks for people in different time zones. So I want to do something that can accommodate for a lot of people. And my thought is, potentially could open up like a Discord chat room. People can jump in and off on a call with me as I'm going through the demo. I'll kind of have like an agenda prepped, so something that we can go off of. So like a couple goals that we can accomplish, and it'll kind of be like the grand finale. Tentatively, I'm looking at like the week, or like Saturday, April 16th. Still TBD on that, but that'll be the last stream. That'll be the end of the Road to DevNet Expert streams. Because then I'm going into complete lockdown these last 2 weeks. And then I take my tests. It's crazy enough. I'm a little more than a month out right now. And I mean, you can see here 33 days. And for those that have been around, I mean, I remember when I was still waiting on registration to open, right? Like, and that days remaining was like above 60, I think. So time's flying. So we're almost there, and I'm excited. So thanks for everyone that tuned in tonight. I hope you learned a little bit about Ansible. And if you have any questions, like I said, Twitter's the best place to find me. And until next week, we will be talking about CI/CD pipelines next week, so you definitely don't want to miss it. Thanks again, and I will talk to everyone later. Oh, sorry, there's one last question. Nick says, how many times are you planning to do those big labs? Ideally, you need to do it a few times, first for accuracy, then for speed. Yeah, so Nick, I'm planning to do one on stream, but I plan to do those probably 2 or 3 times off stream. Once I get like I don't want to call it an agenda, but kind of like a list of things to do, like a task list. I'll probably be doing it a few times off stream, but I'll be streaming it at least once. I'm planning to do it at least once. So, but yeah, thanks for the recommendation. I was thinking that the whole time. I was thinking that because I originally thought the 5 hours for the practical lab piece was going to be kind of long, until I started like visualizing and thinking through some of the tasks and what things they're going to ask. And I'm like, I don't know, 5 hours is going to be long enough. So I was thinking like, yeah, do it a couple times. So that way do it for accuracy and then for speed. So yeah, I'll be doing it a few times, but just once on stream. I don't want to do multiple 5-6 hour streams. So I'll be doing it offline, but yeah, I won't be streaming it. So Nick said, yeah, you say, Nick says, I hope aren't going to be a distraction for you during the live stream. No, honestly, I'm not pressed. You know, the live stream, if you have questions, just like we do with this stream, you know, we get some things done. But I'm here to the reason I stream is to keep, you know, the community involved. So if you have questions, I want to answer them. If you have any sort of, nerves about some sort of topic and you just want like to get it off your chest, you know, bring it up in the stream, talk to me about it, talk to the others in chat. So, no, I don't think you'll be a distraction. It'll be cool, I think. So I'm going to finalize details on that and try to have that ready by next stream, and so I can kind of talk through it. But, all right. Well, hope you all have a great, tomorrow's Friday, so have a great Friday and rest of your weekend, and I will talk to you next Thursday. See you.
Till I get up, time is barely on our side. I don't wanna waste what's left. The storms we chase are leading us, and love is all we'll ever trust.